Well, CTV News overnight declared that the Liberals did win enough seats in the 45th federal election campaign to form a minority government. In a stunning turnaround, Liberal leader Mark Carney led the party to victory in the federal election. We're joined now by Bloomberg's Divya Balji. She's managing editor for Breaking News Americas and joins us from Bloomberg in downtown Toronto. Divya, what are people saying about these results from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there's two elements here. I think number one, we did see quite a bit of volatility in the Canadian dollar when this came through last night. You know, I think the Canadian dollar did actually surge a little bit once we found out that Carney had won or was projected to win. I think the other question here is also, you know, with 168 seats so far, we likely will not get a majority government. So what does this mean for getting things done in the next few years for Carney and for the Liberals? Who are they going to sign on with, or who are they going to partner with? What are some of the initiatives that can actually get through? Will it be housing? Will it be tax related? Will it be, you know, trade deficit related? Now, I think the number one thing on people's minds is, where are we going with the U.S.? How are things going to look from the perspective of, you know, is Carney going to be able to get a conversation in with Trump? You know, Trump has said that he is looking forward to speaking with the next Prime Minister of Canada in the past. Is this going to be an in-person meeting? Where will the trade talks go? Where will the tariff talks go? There's a lot going on here. But more on a Canadian level, it's going to be about housing. It's going to be about immigration. It is going to be about tax cuts, if there are any that could come along, and cost of living in general. I think these are all the things that people are thinking about right now.
Divya, thank you so much for your insight, as always. Okay, let's get a conversation going among two leading experts in politics. They're both veterans of the Canadian political scene. Both have served in governments. One of them has served in minority governments. Lisa Raitt is sitting with me in the studio. She's now Vice Chair of Global Investment Banking at CIBC Capital Markets. She's a former Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party. John Manley also joins us. He joins us remotely. He is Chair of Jefferies Canada and a Senior Advisor to Bennett Jones. He's also a former Liberal Finance Minister and a former Liberal Deputy Prime Minister. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Lisa Raitt, you have experience in governing in minority positions, correct? You were part of two Stephen Harper minority governments, correct? What do last night's results look like to you?
Well, it looks like the fact that we've had 8 elections and we've returned 6 minority governments, which from a corporate standpoint is not necessarily a good thing. You want to see a little bit more certainty. You want to see a little bit more longevity, because when you have a minority government, yes, you're dealing with the current issues of the day, but you're also in the back of your mind trying to think about how you're going to get that majority government, because a majority government in a Canadian parliamentary system has a lot of power and a lot of ability to get the big projects that you want done.
How do you think this parliament shapes up? The Liberals aren't that far away from majority, and if you look further down the list, if you get past the Conservatives, you've got the NDP, which are now well into sub-official party status, and the Bloc Québécois, which has also lost ground and are a Quebec-focused party, obviously. Yeah. Is there anybody there that's going to prop up the Liberal government, or does the Liberal government need that kind of propping up right now?
They definitely do. I mean, they have to go back to the House of Commons and prove that they have confidence of the House. That comes on the first order of business, which is speech from the throne. And they're going to have to line up either the Bloc or the NDP to give them that support to get them across the line. But one intricacy of all this as well is that with the loss of our leader in his election last night, we don't have an official leader of the opposition in the House of Commons, because that title is actually tied to being an elected member of Parliament, not being the head of a party, which is different from what Mr. Carney just did in terms of Prime Minister. Okay,
I want to get your thoughts on Pierre Poilievre in just a second, but I want to go to John Manley in the interim. John Manley, you have deep experience as well. If my history is correct, you did not serve in a Liberal minority government. You served in a succession of Chrétien majorities, if I'm correct. What do last night's results look like to you, and how does this minority government forge a path forward?
Well, first, I think that it's true to say business would probably prefer to have the certainty of a majority government, but I would say that this is pretty close. We've seen this kind of government in the past, and they really function on an issue-by-issue basis, and that's actually not a bad discipline. It's in nobody's interest right now to provoke another election anytime soon. As was said, 2 party leaders lost their seats last night. One resigned. The other one is going to face some real scrutiny by his own party, I suspect. Who wants to cause another election? So I think if Mr. Carney fulfills the kind of spirit of what he was saying in his speech last night, that he's endeavoring to govern for all Canadians, that he wants to be, a peacemaker, conciliator, then he can probably run this government for quite a long time. And also, we shouldn't forget, there's still counting going on starting at 9:30 this morning, Eastern time, in ridings that were too close to call last night. So it's possible he could squeak out a majority. I think it's a little bit unlikely, but this is really very close.
Lisa Raitt, one of his first jobs is to go to Washington, or at least get on the phone to Washington and start talking as now the elected Prime Minister of the country. Is his hand weakened in those difficult negotiations by the fact that he is not a majority leader if the majority scenario holds?
I don't think so at all. He does have two sets of negotiations, though, internally. It's not only talking to the other opposition parties in terms of bolstering that support in the House of Commons. He has to reach out to the provincial premiers, because when we're talking about trade, different provinces have different levels of pain when it comes to trade exposure. And they're going to want to have some kind of say in what's going to be happening in the negotiations, or whatever it is that's going to happen between the United States, Canada, and Mexico.
Okay, Pierre Poilievre, where does he go from here? Does he find a safe riding to run in, or will he face pressure to leave?
His first step is going to be to reach out to his supporters. Second step is to call the caucus together and determine on that phone call as to what he thinks he's going to do. He has to take the temperature of the people around him, and then he's going to have to make a decision. It's really tough to ask a sitting member of parliament to step aside for a period of time in order for your leader to run in a safer seat. Right. It is a really tough ask.
And that would be somebody who just won, more to the point.
That's right. And it's a job, right? It's an actual job, and you have to wonder what ends up happening.
John Manley, your view on Mark Carney and his negotiating position with Donald Trump now?
Well, I don't think he's in a weakened position from that point of view. I agree with Lisa that he has the authority, has the responsibility, and honestly, in dealing on the Canada-U.S. issue, I suspect he'll have the support of the Conservatives and the NDP in representing Canada. I don't think there was much to distinguish among the three parties on that. The bloc is a whole other matter, of course. So I think he can feel confident in that. I think the question that he needs to be thinking about right now is, how do you begin a negotiation with somebody who's already in breach of the agreement you already have with them? In other words, we have, this is not like we just saw with the Japanese, for example. It's not the Europeans. We actually already have a trade agreement with the United States. And not only that, it was signed with the first Trump administration. And on day one in office, he just ignored it. Well, what kind of agreement do you make with somebody who ignores what they have previously agreed to do? So he may well decide to tell Mr. Trump that he'll be happy to sit at the table with him as soon as he gets back into line with the agreements that he's already committed to. In other words, take the tariffs off steel and aluminum, take the tariffs off autos, take the tariffs off the other commodities that may or may not be caught in this. It's very confusing for the customs brokers to figure out what's tariffed and what isn't at this point. But let's go back to the USMCA, and if you want to negotiate changes to that, let's talk.
Lisa Raitt, what does Canada's business community want to see in these negotiations with Trump?
I think they want to see certainty. I think they want to see the fact that they can look to Canada as a safe place to invest, to build, to create jobs, to run the economy. I think those are things that are going to be important. And we do have a bit of a timeline here that we can point to, because Canada is the host of the G7 coming up in a mere 6 weeks. If you'd like to have an announcement around that period of time, the Prime Minister and his team have to start talking to whoever's in charge in the administration in the United States very quickly, because it takes a long time to negotiate these kinds of communiques. And you don't want to have anything blowing up on you rolling into the summer. So it'll be an important piece of diplomacy, but as well an opportunity to get us on a good footing economically.
businesses and individuals will be.
Paul, I think it's important to point out, U.S. business would also like certainty.
Yeah.
This man in the White House is seeding chaos everywhere in the world. So this uncertainty, which Canadian business is facing, is neither unique to us, nor is it fully within our control or in our government's control.
U.S. corporations, John, are coming forward with their results on a daily basis now, as you know. Today it's General Motors and UPS withdrawing their financial guidance for this very reason. Do you expect that drumbeat of U.S. corporations saying, we don't know what's going on, we can't forecast, we can't invest? Do you expect that ultimately to have an impact in the White House?
Well, I think that he looks at two things. He's going to be looking at the stock market, which of course is an imperfect indicator of what's going on in the economy, but it is an indicator. And the last 100 days have not been good for him on that score. And he's also going to look at the public opinion polls. Now, they look bad for him, but if you break them down and just look at how Republicans are feeling, he still has their strong support. So I think there is going to be an inflection point that comes when his base, including the MAGA base, not just Republicans, but the MAGA base, begins to feel the pain. You can do a lot of things by executive order in the United States. You cannot suspend the rules of economics. And what he is doing is going to cause inflation. It's going to cause stagnation. It's going to cause jobs to be lost. And when that starts to happen to his supporters, then I think you'll start to see some flexibility.
Lisa Raitt, you've been nodding in agreement. I'll leave the last word to you.
I think that the new Prime Minister, Mr. Carney, does have his work cut out for him. But I also believe that he has experience both in terms of dealing in the financial world and of dealing with big projects like at the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England. We're in good hands. It's up to him, though, to chart the right path forward and get the deal done. The problem in Ottawa is execution. And while he may have been barely used to doing great deals here in this community, it makes it a little bit more difficult to do it in Ottawa. And I wish him the best.
Lisa Raitt, thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your insight. John Manley, likewise to yourself. Thanks for being part of this conversation. Lisa Raitt is Vice Chair of Global Investment Banking at CIBC Capital Markets. She's also a Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, former Deputy Leader. John Manley is Chair of Jefferies Canada and a Senior Advisor to Bennett Jones and a former Finance Minister and a former Deputy Prime Minister. It takes a while to read the credentials of those two guests.